All right, so you get the turntables. Parents are freaking out, but you spent your own money, which was important.
Right.
So from that point on, you go get lessons. You just
No,
start messing
no,
around. How
there
do
were
you?
no lessons. There was
Okay.
no DJ school. There was nothing. I literally, so I had like, I set up in like a little empty room in my parents' house. Basically, I remember like on stools, set up my turntables, like this horrible setup that I had going on, but I made it work. And I literally would sit in that room, like stand in that room practicing for almost 8 hours a day. And I had the double tape cassette recorder.
Right.
So I would literally tape every single set that I did. And then I would like get in my car, drive around, listen to my mixes and hear these horrible mixes. And I remember I was dating this guy at the time that was actually like a producer that ended up being like being really big. But we ended up going through a breakup. He was also like kind of a DJ. He was like in the drum bass scene, kind of whatever. That's how we met. But I remember going through the breakup with him and DJing, like just being so upset, like crying, like in front of my turntables, just like practicing DJing. And all of a sudden, I just started feeling better. Like, and DJing completely turned into therapy for me because anytime I would be upset, like I wasn't even a DJ at the time. I was like a DJ in my head, like I was like a bedroom DJ.
Right.
But like I just realized at that time, like it just ended up getting me through so much stuff. Like I'd be sad, crying, and then I would do a bad mix and I'd like start laughing at myself and completely got me out of my head, and it honestly turned out to be an amazing thing.
Who was the producer?
I can't say.
Can't say. Well, shout out to him because if it wasn't for him, you never know. That might not be a DJ L.
Maybe,
Maybe,
yeah.
maybe not. So at what point did you feel confident enough to take it out the bedroom and actually play in front of people? Like, what was your first public gig?
Okay, so my first gig ever was at a house party at someone's house in an apartment in New York City. So it was a house party. I remember I'm in this apartment. There's turntables. I brought records. And that was the first time I ever DJ'd ever in front of people. And I have a picture like of me DJing that night. That was the first time I ever DJ'd in front of people. And it went well. Like I remember like people giving me props. And then I was like, okay, I could do this. And I don't think I've ever honestly felt comfortable DJing, but it's something that I love. I love mixing records, and I think that's how I ended up where I was, just like the love of music and mixing records. And I don't know, it just took me out of somewhere and put me somewhere else. And it's kind of crazy that it's been 20 years and I created a career out of just like practicing and loving music. And yeah, it's amazing.
Something that you love to do. Now, are you still in the drum and bass scene at this time, or are you transitioning more into like hip hop and
I'm not in the drum and bass scene. I don't really, there's still a drum and bass scene, I'm sure. Since I've been in Miami, I've been in Miami for 10 years. I don't know of a drum and bass scene down here. I'm sure there must be some sort of
right?
scene, but yeah.
I mean, at that time during your first gig, were you still in
Oh,
the drum and bass scene?
okay. So yes, I was. And it's crazy because when I first started DJing and practicing DJing and like the records that I was buying, it was all drum and bass records. And I would buy like a little bit of like hip hop records. Like I remember buying Black Moon and stuff like that.
That's interesting that you say you first started practicing with drum and bass because if anybody knows about drum and bass, that's not easy to mix,
No.
especially on vinyl.
Right.
So
It was the hardest thing, and that's how I learned how to DJ. I learned how to DJ from drum and bass music. I have never once in my life ever played drum and bass out. My drum and bass record collection is insane. It's one of my most prized record collections. Like to this day, I love those records. They have never ever been played out in a club ever. And the first time I've ever played out, and then like to now, I've never played drum and bass. It's always been hip hop.
So would that be considered like a dream set for you, like an all vinyl drum and bass set, or would
In a
you?
way, yes. Like deep down inside, I really do want to do one drum and bass DJ set. Like I do. I really want to do just like one drum and bass set, like an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours, and then like I'll be good. But I feel like I have to do it once in my life.
I think
And
so
it
too.
almost happened a few years ago. Like there was almost a drum and bass party in Miami with like some people from New York, and then it just like didn't end up happening. But I did record a drum and bass mixtape with Michna, who used to work at Turntable Lab. So I do have a drum and bass mix out there that you could actually listen to.
Okay, well, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. So transitioning from doing like house parties and everything like that, what was like your first club gig?
One of the first clubs that I remember doing was in Bayshore, Long Island. Um, And I remember it was insane that I remember there was a bouncer on the stage next to me. The club was crazy. I remember that. I really didn't ever hang out in Long Island, but I got booked to do this thing in Bayshore, Long Island. So I did it. And I remember the bouncer while I was DJing was like jumping on the stage, like so hype the whole entire set that I thought he was gonna like break the stage and fall through the stage. Like it was so crazy. And like so many people were like giving me props after that set that I was like, I have to do this more.
Right.
And it was always like from the bouncers, like wherever I was at, like no matter if I was like DJing at a clothing store or a club, like you can always kind of tell by the bouncers, like they were kind of always like my go-to. Like even if no one's in the club yet, if you're like just starting, like if the bouncer's vibing, like you're good.
Exactly, because they're there working, have to deal with idiots and drunk people all night, so they're not usually in the best of moods. You got to deal with some of the dumbest people in the club and nightlife industry. So, as a DJ, if you're able to get them to move, or even just nod their head, or as you say, this guy was jumping up and down, acting a fool, that's like a win for you because they hear DJs all the time, just from working different clubs or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
So, that's a valid point. I definitely try to look and vibe with the bouncers earlier on in the set before anybody gets there.
Yeah.
Just to make sure, like, okay, I'm doing my thing. So when do you start? I know you mentioned earlier that you started working in the tunnel, right?
Yes.
And this was from a DJing perspective, or
No, so I started working in the tunnel in '97.
okay,
I was going to Pace University, my first year in college. So they were looking for like a promoter. They needed a promoter, someone to basically stand outside of clubs like Life on Bleecker Street or stand in Washington Square Park all day and just pass out flyers.
right,
So I had just turned 18. So otherwise I wouldn't have been able to work there. So it was like perfect timing. Like literally I just turned 18 a week before I got this job. So I remember like I would go to the tunnel, pick up flyers and stand outside of Life till like 4:30 in the morning handing out flyers. And like Life was like super popping back then. Yeah, so that's how it started. I guess I was a promoter handing out flyers for maybe like 6 months to a year. And then one of my friends, John Super, he became the assistant art director at the tunnel, which was pretty awesome. So he was like, I need an assistant. You could be the assistant art director. So I was like, yes, like I don't want to stand outside of clubs anymore. Like I'll totally be the assistant art director. So then I was the assistant art director at the tunnel, which basically was like setting up for like S&M night or like painting the walls or like building a tent in the tunnel or like taking stuff and moving them around the tunnel, like basically just making sure the tunnel looked awesome because Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night was when there were events going on. And then that job ended up like ending. He wasn't the assistant art director anymore. And then they were looking for a cashier, which it was like hard kind of, I think, to get like a cashier job at the tunnel. And I landed this cashier job, which was amazing. I was the youngest cashier. Like all the cashiers were like way older than me. And it was awesome. It was a cool job. I was making $18.50 an hour at the time, which was like a lot. Like people were
90s,
like,
yeah.
oh my God, I can't believe like you're in college making $18.50 an hour, like working at the tunnel. So it was pretty awesome.